the pilot requested to transit the Burbank Class Charlie airspace, but ATC advised him to hold due to traffic. Weather in this area was reported as cloud ceilings 1,100 feet above ground level, with visibility 2.5 miles. About 11 minutes later, ATC provided special VFR clearance to proceed through the Burbank and Van Nuys airspace. Throughout this segment of flight, the helicopter was maintaining an altitude of about 500 feet above ground level. As the flight proceeded to the west out of the San Fernando Valley area, ATC advised the pilot that they would be too low for flight following, and they should contact Camarillo Tower as they got closer. The pilot acknowledged, and the helicopter proceeded to the west, following US Route 101 toward an area of rising terrain at a speed of about 140 knots. About 4 minutes later, the pilot contacted ATC again and advised them that he was intending to climb to go above the cloud layers. A surveillance camera near the 101 captured the helicopter about this time. The helicopter had been flying about 350 feet above ground level, but during the transmission to ATC began climbing at a rate of about 1,500 feet per minute, while generally following the 101 in a slight left turn. In this brief clip, you'll see the helicopter from the top right of the screen flying along the highway. During radio communications with ATC, the helicopter climbed through an altitude of 2,000 feet above sea level, or about 1,300 feet above ground level, by which point it was highly unlikely for the pilot to be able to maintain visual ground contact. The climb reached a maximum altitude of about 2,400 feet above sea level, as the helicopter continued a left turn diverging from the highway. The controller asked the pilot's intentions, and he said he was climbing to 4,000 feet. However, by that time, the helicopter was in a tightening left turn and descending rapidly. This maneuver is consistent with a pilot experiencing spatial disorientation in limited visibility conditions. Dr. Civilian will have further details on this phenomena in his presentation. The helicopter impacted hilly terrain on a generally northeasterly bearing at a high speed and descent rate. Safety issues include continued VFR flight into instrument weather conditions due to self-induced pressure and planned continuation bias, leading to spatial disorientation due to physiological factors, including inner ear vestibular illusions. Staff has made recommendations regarding spatial disorientation training and simulation, as well as reiterated recommendations for safety management systems for Part 135 operators and flight data recording and monitoring programs for Part 135 operators. Mr. Richards will now present on meteorological factors.
Good morning. I will be discussing the weather surrounding the accident flight. At the time of the aircraft's departure, Orange County, Burbank, Van Nuys, and Camarillo were all reporting ceilings greater than 1,000 feet, and only Van Nuys was reporting a visibility less than 3 miles. Regional Terminal Aerodrome Forecasts, or TAFs, which provide weather forecasts for airports that were current at the time of departure, forecasted for the flight period ceilings at 1,000 feet or greater and visibilities of 3 miles or greater, except Van Nuys, which forecasted a visibility of 2 miles until 9:30 that morning. It should be noted that no TAFs were valid for the accident location. Airmets for IFR conditions and mountain obscuration were issued prior to the aircraft's departure and were active for the accident location at the accident time. Weather information for the accident time consistently presented an environment characterized by low clouds and restrictions to visibility. The image on the top left depicts hilltops near the accident site at elevations of about 1,400 feet obscured by cloud, and is compared with a clear day image below it. The image on the right is from a camera looking toward the accident location from a position about 2 miles east at an elevation of about 1,300 feet. This image was captured about the time of the accident and depicted relatively smooth and unbroken cloud tops at 2,400 to 2,500 feet. As Mr. English presented, a camera captured the aircraft moving toward the west and disappearing from view about 1 minute prior to the accident. About this time, an eyewitness on the ground below the aircraft's flight path witnessed the aircraft below or at the cloud line before it disappeared into heavy clouds that they described as a thick wall. Also about this time, the aircraft began its climb from an altitude of about 1,400 feet to about 2,300 feet. Though it was heard, no local cameras or eyewitnesses saw the aircraft during its climb. However, staff could not determine conclusively if the pilot would have been able to maintain intermittent ground contact at points between 1,400 and 2,000 feet. Above 2,000 feet, instrument meteorological conditions, or IMC, prevailed. Thank you. Mr. Salazar will continue with his presentation.
Good morning. I will brief you on operations. Island Express Helicopters was operating on an FAA-approved operations specification document that authorized the pilots to conduct on-demand, day and night, visual flight rules only flights. The company had 25 employees and operated 6 helicopters. Island Express was experienced in conducting charter flights. In 2019 alone, they flew 495 charter flights, many catering to high-profile clients. Island Express occasionally received flight requests from an air charter broker who used them exclusively for the accident client's local aviation transportation requests. The pilot was certificated, current, and qualified to fly in visual flight rules in accordance with federal regulations and company requirements. He had about 8,577 hours flying experience, which included about 1,250 hours in the Sikorsky S-76 series helicopter and about 75 hours of instrument flying time. There was no evidence of any pre-existing medical conditions and no evidence of acute or chronic sleep loss. After gaining employment with Island Express, the pilot completed all required company training, including Sikorsky S-76 ground and flight training, which contained modules for aeronautical decision-making and judgment, instrument procedures, unusual attitude flight, procedures for recovering from inadvertent entry into instrument meteorological conditions, and spatial disorientation. As the chief pilot, he held the responsibility of supervising and training all Island Express pilots. Upon advancement to check airman, he gained the additional responsibility of evaluating Sikorsky S-76 pilots during their annual proficiency and line checks. Island Express contracted with an outside training vendor that reinforced the ground and flight training using the company's helicopters. Per company policy, pilots were to fly no lower than 300 feet above ground level, with 500 to 1,000 feet above ground level recommended as a minimum altitude. Company policy identified 1 nautical mile as the minimum visibility when operating in uncontrolled airspace. These company minimums were more conservative than the Federal Aviation Regulation Part 135 helicopter altitude and visibility minimums. Company policy stated that all flights were to be accomplished in accordance with federal regulations and required pilots to obtain a weather briefing from the approved weather sources, and in the absence of that, by whatever sources are available. About 2 hours before his departure from the John Wayne Orange County Airport, the pilot completed a flight risk assessment that was consistent with weather forecast available at that time. The flight risk assessment fell into the low risk category and required no further actions. The pilot developed a plan to avoid forecasted clouds by flying east and north of downtown Los Angeles and filed a company flight plan.